really was me on this quest of seeking what is the Holy Grail? Like, what is the one thing? What is the answer? Because this is what happens when you wake up. Like, this is what happens when this awakening journey begins and you start to become more aware of yourself. Because let's be clear, that's what an awakening is. It's becoming more aware of self. And all it does is invite in more questions. Hello, my loves. This is Johanna Burkhardt. I am a multidimensional channel, teacher, healer, and author. And I am obsessed with all things metaphysical, esoteric, galactic, and of course, the healing journey. And I'm here to share my stories, my wisdom, and my teachings about being human in the illusion that we call reality. Welcome to Cosmic Blonde. Hello, my loves. Today, we are going to be celebrating the second anniversary of my book, Holy Grail, The Journey Through My Soul's Evolution. This was published on 11/11/21. And so much has changed since I published this book. And I just kind of want to talk about the highs and lows. I've kind of marked some spots in the books to read and talk about. But first and foremost, I want to say, I just am going to toot my own horn for a minute because I wrote a whole fucking book, And I've been a co-author in another book that is a Amazon bestseller. And I've written my children's journal. So it's not like this was the first book I've written, but this is the first book I've written where I was very vulnerable and I put my truth out there of what happened to me as a child, a lot about my awakening journey and what that looked like, and the guidance that came through that really kind of helped guide me through, right? It really was me on this quest of seeking what is the Holy Grail? Like, what is the one thing? What is the answer? Because this is what happens when you wake up. Like, this is what happens when this awakening journey begins and you start to become more aware of yourself. Because let's be clear, that's what an awakening is. It's becoming more aware of self. And all it does is invite in more questions. I mean, literally, especially in the beginning. And you're seeking all of these answers. And a lot of them you're seeking outside of yourself because you're so new on this journey, right? And you don't quite know what to trust anymore or what's true and what isn't. And for me, my awakening journey, when I really look back, it started in about 2008. In 2008, I had my first real fear of my father's mortality, of my father dying. My dad started having health issues, and I had anchored all of my safety into my father as a child when my mom left, I think around the age of 3. And so I had a very enmeshed, codependent relationship with my father. It wasn't healthy, and I love him. And he was, in my eyes, the greatest man to ever walk this earth, even though he definitely was not perfect and he definitely caused me pain. I still worship him, which we shouldn't worship anybody, but I do. I just adore my dad and I miss him so much in the physical, but I had anchored so much of my safety into him. So in 2008, I started to have things happen. Like, I had to face my father's mortality and I had a total hysterectomy, which gutted a lot of all of my, female organs. And there was a lot of trauma in those organs that was set free that I didn't realize why I was in pain to begin with. And this is kind of a side note, but if you are considering having a hysterectomy, or if you have female issues, really look into ancestral healing, sexual trauma, those types of things that are related to the sacral chakra. If I would have known then what I know now, I wouldn't have had a hysterectomy. But removing the organs did not remove the trauma. It set it free in a way. And so it really kind of began everything for me, because then my hormones were completely out of balance and I gained a bunch of weight and I went through my very first dark night of the soul. And as I came out of it in 2011, I started to see the light. That's when everything broke. Like that's when everything changed. I don't want to say broke, everything changed, right? So as you start to awaken, that's when you have these big shifts. So I ended up getting a divorce. I started to no longer resonate with my group of friends that I had been friends with for like 8 years at the time. And I still saw them and I still hung out with them, but I was starting to seek other friendships and see, is this who I am? Is this who I am? Because I really didn't know who I was anymore. And I started to no longer resonate with the beliefs that I had that had been programmed in me for so long, but I didn't know what my new beliefs were, you know? And so it's just this great unfolding that you kind of open up and you're like, I thought I trusted myself. I thought I knew what I wanted in life. I thought I knew all of these things. I thought I was so certain. And then as you begin to open up, and an awakening is not a one-time event. It happens over time throughout the rest of your lifetime. Once it starts, it's not going to stop. It's not going to slow down. You just become more and more open and more aware. And it just leads to more and more questions and more curiosity. And it's such a journey of unlearning and exploration, and reconciliation, which is what we call healing, right? So anyway, I always knew that I was going to write a book. I always knew I was going to write a book. I remember as a child envisioning myself on stages, and I knew I was going to write a book, but I never knew about what. I figured probably my life story. I really didn't have the best life story. And so, I mean, nobody really wants to write about pain, you know? In fact, after I wrote my book, about 6 months after, I really didn't want to fucking talk about it anymore, to be honest. I just didn't. I didn't want to talk about the pain anymore. I didn't want to talk about the hurt. I didn't want to talk about the abuse. I wanted to focus on joy instead. And I had expectations about my book after it published that obviously were not met. And so there's a lot of joy and pain wrapped in this book, but at the end of the day, I wrote a whole fucking book. I published it. I'm a published author. This book will be out there for life. And that is an accomplishment and a success all on its own. And to most authors, you don't write books to make money. You don't write books to become a New York Times bestseller. You write books from your heart. You write books for the creative process, for the joy of it, because let me tell you, the editing part and the publishing part is no fun whatsoever at all. But slowing down and kind of going back, I started writing this book in end of 2017, beginning of 2018. And I wrote most of the book within a 6-7 month period. And when I got to chapter 9, I hit writer's block. And that writer's block was all based in fear, 100% based in fear. Because the perpetrators that I discuss in my book, while I don't name them, some people will be able to figure out who knew me, who they were, but they're still alive. And I had a lot of fear of putting this out because as a child, and even as, you know, most of my life, honestly, nobody knew the truth about what happened behind closed doors in my house. Nobody knew what was really going on, especially after the age of 10, when my stepmother came into the picture, who was my primary abuser in my life. And so nobody really knew. My grandmother knew. There was a select couple of friends that knew some stuff, but not everything, right? I kept that very hidden because I had a lot of shame around it. And I just wanted to be a normal child that had a normal childhood and normal life. And I totally did not have that experience. And so you really don't want to talk about it. You want, especially as a child, you want to escape it. You want to live in a different reality. And I very much did that, right? I created my own reality in my head of what was happening and kind of disassociated from it a lot at the time to survive as a coping mechanism. And so I stopped writing for a long time. And then I went through a transition in my life. I got divorced again. I moved, and it was time for me to finish the book. I had worked through the fear of putting this information out there and what questions it might lead to, or what really, how my family might respond if they so choose to read the book. I talked about my mother, and my mom read my book, actually. So there was a lot of scarcity and fear around what would people say and the judgment. And I had to face that own self-judgment. Because when you start to remember trauma and abuse, you can sometimes feel like you are going crazy, because these memories come back. I know for me, they came back in 2015 after my father died. They flooded back. I started having flashbacks. They started coming in my dreams. Not just the memories that I had repressed from the abuse, but also all of my intuitive senses fully opened up. Like they were already opening up. I was already seeing, I was already feeling, I was already getting messages from spirit, but they ripped every single one of my senses: seeing, feeling, hearing, sensing, smelling, tasting. They all ripped wide open. And FYI, if you ever have, don't ever, let me rephrase this. Don't ever envy somebody who has the gift of taste and smell, because tasting cigarettes when you don't smoke is disgusting. And I did smoke for a very long time. I quit smoking in 2016. But after, and I started tasting it, years after I quit smoking, no fun, just saying. So those two, they're more rare gifts. Not everybody has those. And I always say, don't care about them. They're cool, but most of the time, the things that you're smelling or tasting are unpleasant. I'm just going to be honest. So they're not exciting ones to have, So anyway, I finished writing in 2020. Actually, at the very end of 2020 is when I finished it. And I was so blessed. My editor was my best friend, Tanya, and she knew my voice, and she wasn't going to be an asshole like, a lot of editors can be if you get a publishing deal. And I didn't want to wait, because that's what I originally was going to do. And most people don't know that, is I was going to hire a literary agent and try to get a publishing deal. And I probably would have and could have, but it takes a long time. It's not something that happens overnight. I mean, some people get lucky, but I didn't want to wait. I wanted to self-publish, and then I could always shop my book to have a publisher pick it up, if I really wanted to later on. But I was getting ready, and this is how important this book was, that when I finally finished it, I cried for probably 3 or 4 hours, like just bawled when I finished this book. The pressure and the release that it gave me, that these words, my truth, my story was now on paper. And the next day I was getting ready to go into surgery, and I sent the whole manuscript to Tanya. And I said, if I die on this operating table, you have to make sure that this gets published, because it almost felt like a legacy. It felt like if it didn't get out there, it would have, I don't know. I can't even put words to it. I can't even articulate it, but I needed my truth to be out there. I really needed my truth to be out there. And this book was so healing for me to write. It was so healing for me to write. A funny story about the book is the cover. So this cover was done in Michigan, in Ironwood. I think it's at Interstate Falls is where we took this. So I flew up to Michigan and had Tanya, who not just was my editor, but she was the photographer for the book cover, take this photo. And for those that haven't seen it, it's me in a white dress with like a shawl or a silk. I think it was a chiffon silk piece of like long, what do you call it? Scarf, whatever. Like it went over my shoulders and my arms. It was just draped. So I had ordered this gorgeous dress like 7 weeks before I was to fly to Michigan. And about 4 weeks in, I still hadn't received it. Still hadn't received it. In fact, to be honest, I never did receive that dress. Now that I think about it, I never actually got it. It never arrived. So I had to take a drink. I found a backup dress and I said, shit, I'm like 2 weeks out from flying. So let me ship it directly to Tanya's house. And I knew what day we were going to do the photo shoot. And it said it was supposed to arrive like the day before the photo shoot. And I was like, oh, it'll be fine. It will get there. I mean, she lives in a tiny town in the middle of fucking nowhere. So, everything usually takes a little bit longer to get there. But I was like, oh, it'll be fine. It will get there. It'll work out. Well, it didn't. It didn't fucking work out. The dress did not come. Her town has no mall, has no major shopping stores whatsoever. So I went to Walmart and bought white material, basically white sheet, and then a big giant piece of chiffon, white chiffon. And we made a toga dress held together by safety pins, hair ties, and clips. This thing was not on well. And I will say I was going commando underneath. I did have a black slip on underneath to kind of, but other than that, there was nothing else happening underneath there. So it was very risky. And we had to walk down a dirt trail, a hiking trail for quite a ways to get, and then down like a couple of flights of stairs that her neighbor actually built to get to the bottom of the falls. And then I had to navigate holding this toga dress up in this cold water, walking barefoot in the cold water over to a giant rock sitting in front of the waterfalls while she's across from me. And while I have exceptional hearing, when you have a waterfall behind you, the amount of white noise is insane. So she had to scream at me to get me to change my pose. And I'm sitting there and the chiffon is super long and it's flowing in the water. And I look down, there's these little fucking crawdads trying to grab on and crawl up. And I'm just like coming out of my skin because I'm trying to focus on like looking relaxed and smiling and being in the photo shoot moment while also navigating, trying not to have crawdads crawling all over me. And it was just so crazy. So we get through that. We didn't get all the shots that we wanted. She wanted to do this superimposed shot. And by the time we got to that location, the light had changed and it was no good. Like we just ran out of time. But the photo shoot went well. Like we have, obviously the picture on the cover is my favorite. It's why I picked it. And it's me holding this big chalice, this gold chalice, like drinking out of, the chalice, the gold cup. And so anyway, get out. My dress is muddy and dirty. Excuse me. And so I changed, I had brought shorts. So I changed right there. And we get back to the house and we're actually on the way back to her house. We're both feeling disgusting. Like we feel so dirty, so dirty. And like that dirty where you're like, oh my God, I need to take a shower. Like you just feel icky. And you wouldn't think of getting in a waterfall or a mountain spring, basically a mountain river, that you would feel that. You think you would feel refreshed. I know when I held a retreat in Asheville, we went in the mountain streams like that, off hiking trails. And they were and I mean, the water was ice cold, but it was so refreshing and we felt so clean. And this did not feel like that at all. We just felt so grody. So anyway, we get back, we take a shower. We're sitting there that night. Her neighbor comes over and, I don't know if it was her guitar that he restrung, but anyway, he had a guitar and he was coming over about the guitar and he was sitting at the table talking to us. And we were telling him about our day. And he goes, I built those stairs that take you down to hidden Interstate Falls. And we're like, oh, that's super cool. Because it really was a nice deck. And then he goes, yeah, it's a sewage runoff. And we both look at each other, say, what? It was a fucking sewage runoff, guys. Sewage. Thank God, my private parts did not go into the water. Like there was a point where I was supposed to go in the water and I couldn't do it. I was like hovering, like I was trying to pee. And I was like, I can't go down. I can't go down in the water. I just couldn't do it. Thank God I did not do it. God knows I probably would have ended up with some kind of weird bacterial infection. But it was literally me taking a photo shoot in shit water. Oh man. So, but it was perfect for the book because literally in this book, I'm talking about turning my pain into purpose, right? You know, pain into gold, turning shit into gold, like a shit life. And it turned out beautiful, right? And so it was kind of metaphoric and perfect at the same time. And this story, oh my God, it makes me laugh every fucking time. It makes me laugh so much. And so I'm super proud of myself in this book. And I know that it's helped people because I've had people reach out and tell me that it's help them, and it was a game changer. And everyone always asks me, are you going to do an audible or an audio book? And I'm just going to be transparent. I have dyslexia and I can channel and speak very well and in flow. But when I'm reading, even though I'm reading my own words, I was in a flow when I wrote this. I'm channeling a part of myself. Some of it I was channeling my actual guides, or I was channeling other parts of myself. So it was in a flow. It came natural, but reading things is not my jam. And so I don't know if I will ever do an audiobook. And I don't want to have someone else read my book because my words are light encoded. And when I speak, when I'm channeling, they bring through a frequency, and I would want to bring that frequency through in my own book. So I haven't decided yet if that's something that I even want to try to do. It's on my list of contemplations. So anyway, in this book, there's several things that I've highlighted. I'm not sure how many of them that I want to go into. But there is one thing that I share in this book. I didn't go into depth of my story. I just didn't. I don't think I felt safe enough to. I think there might be another book that I will feel safer to go deeper in. But I'd rather focus on more of the wisdom necessarily than the pain moving forward. And I know the next book is going to be more in story form than so much channeled, because Holy Grail was a mix of channeled information and my story. It was interwoven. And while that was beautiful and the book was written beautifully by me, I could really rewrite the whole book because I've evolved and expanded since then. Some of the beliefs that I share in here have actually changed, or my understanding has changed, right? I've allowed more information to come in to expand my awareness and take it to a whole nother level. And so we'll see. I already started writing my next book. It's going extremely slow. In fact, I wrote, I think 3 or 4 paragraphs and stopped and haven't picked it up since. And it's kind of what I did in the beginning with this one too. It's just a process for me. And so hopefully, I will get into a space where I can pick that back up. But I knew with this new book, I knew there was more for me to learn and experience before I was ready to fully write it and commit to writing it. And I always want it to be the most authentic version. I always want it to be the most clearest and accurate representation. And I just felt I wasn't quite there yet. So it had to go on pause. I do start the story, my book, sharing like the backstory of my awakening. And as I told you in the beginning, from 2008 to 2011, I had that first part of my awakening. That was my mental awakening. That's when my beliefs just started to open up and shift. And I didn't really know what to believe. And it's funny because in the book, I read about this. So I'm just going to read it to you because it's going to do it in way better justice than paraphrasing. So it says, grief had come to awaken me at a deeper level. It had come to rip the veil out from in front of me and allow me to see what I was willing to face through my own free will. It awakened me to remember my truth. As we awaken, we become more and more aware of what has been hiding behind the veil. The veil is the belief systems we have created or been pre-programmed with to keep us asleep in the physical reality. That's actually important to kind of stop at, because, a lot of spiritual people talk about the veils thinning or the veil this. There hasn't been a collective veil in quite some time. That's important to understand. Secondly, we each have our own personal veil. That personal veil is made up of our belief systems, our programming, our trauma, our wounds, and it kind of muddies the lens in which we see through. And so that can get cleansed and cleared as you grow and evolve. And so we each have a personal veil, but the collective veil, it's long gone. Awakening is to have the remembrance that we are more than the physical reality. We begin to see things that we were not aware of before that have been there all along. We begin to recall memories that were locked away. I talked about that for me. All the beliefs that we had been conditioned with or programmed into us begin to break down or no longer resonate at all. It's not that we have new beliefs or even new desires. It is just a confusing space of what the fuck, to be honest. I mean, there's just no other way to describe it. What I know for sure is this is how I experienced it. I want to empower you with the tools to navigate the levels of awareness that happens as we become one again with our truest form, our soul self. And so, I mean, that's really what was happening. I didn't know what my new beliefs were. And like I said, everything shifted in 2011 and 2013. Here we go again. I went to that next level of my awakening. My emotional awakening was the beginning. I actually left California. I moved to North Carolina. I gave up everything I owned. And in doing so, I kind of ended the soul contracts that I had with my dad and my grandma. And my grandma actually died 2 months after I moved. And a backstory on that was when I owned my insurance brokerage in San Diego, for a few years, I operated it about a year. I operated it out of my home office. Me and my business partner used what used to be it was a converted garage. We turned it into an office building and got rid of the building we were leasing because we really did not need an overhead. And she used to come over at least once a week and bring me boxes with my name on it of her stuff. And I used to tell her, "You're not dying, Grandma. Why do you keep bringing me this stuff?" She knew she was dying. She knew she had cancer long before she took, like 6 years or so before she told anybody that she had it. And so a couple of months after I move, I get a phone call that she has cancer. And I'm the executor of her will. I'm the executor for her medical, like her, I forget what it's called, but her medical directive. I was in charge of her medical decisions. And nobody in the family knew that. So that caused a rift in the family too. And I had to fly back, and I was there for 2 weeks, and she died the day before I left. I felt, I'm getting emotional. I felt an immense amount of guilt because I felt like, had I not moved, maybe she wouldn't have died. Had I not moved, I would have been able to take care of her. It's ridiculous because everything happens for a reason. And I just ended the contract that I had with her. And because I ended that contract, she didn't die because I ended the contract. But I do think that it played a part in it, because she was like my mom for a lot of years for me, because, I didn't have my own mother in the way that I needed to have her. And even though I had a ton of women in my life who were like motherly type figures, my grandma was my person. She taught me how to cook and sew, and God, I had such a special bond with her. I really did. I think, to be transparent, I don't think I've healed a lot of the grief around her. And I'm not sure when that day will come. It just hasn't arrived yet, Anyway, in 2000, so that happened in 2013. 2014, my dad started to have more health issues and he hid them from me. In 2015, he was given 4 months to live at the age of 56. And I had to fly home again, sell my childhood home, everything he owned, which was really hard to witness. I thought me selling everything I owned and giving everything I owned was hard. This was his whole life. He was 56 years old. Everything he'd ever worked for, everything he had built, he had stuff from when he forever. And to watch him sell it, or for me to sell it all and him to watch it for pennies on the dollar, was so heart-wrenching. The whole experience of my father dying was just, I don't wish it on anybody. It was the most horrific thing I've ever lived through. And I think I probably ever will live through, because I just loved him so much. But after he died 3 days before Thanksgiving, and a few months after he died, I started having flashbacks. I mean, this was within 6 months of him dying. I started having flashbacks of abuse. I started, everything kind of ripped wide open for me. All of my senses came online. I started becoming super ultra sensitive to everything. I was more susceptible when I drank. Food affected me differently. I started to gain weight and not feel safe anymore, because I had anchored all my safety in him, and that had disappeared. And I had already had all my gifts starting to open, because after my grandma died, she started coming to me as apparitions, and I started getting messages from spirit and all of that. But it was 2015 when everything got really bad, because all of the trauma that I had repressed had come back, in addition to just being ripped wide open to a whole nother level of seeing, feeling, hearing, sensing that I had never felt before in my life, which can kind of make you feel like you're going fucking crazy. And I had already, before he died, when I got married, 3 days after my wedding, they thought I had a stroke, and half my body went numb. And they gave me the clot buster drug and put me in ICU. And 35 doctors later, they couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. They ruled out it was a stroke. And so they just said, you must have been having seizures. So we're going to put you on seizure medication and antidepressants and anti-anxiety meds, because they knew, I mean, I had told them the stress that I had been under, the extreme pressure and stress that I had been under for a long time. And so they put me on all these medications, and it just put me into such a deep, dark place. So with everything that I was seeing and feeling, and then I was medicated to numb it, it was insane. And I almost committed suicide, because it was so horrific. But I tell you all this because there's actually a picture of it in my book, of this Elizabeth Taylor quote that I printed out on an 8x10 piece of paper and taped to my wall on my side of the bed, because I was so depressed and so confused and overwhelmed by everything that I was seeing and feeling. And I had no support. My husband at the time was not helpful. He was not supportive. He was not emotionally available. In fact, he is somebody who avoids conflict and avoids discomfort at all. And so I was very much left alone in my pain. And I needed to help myself. And so this is the quote. I'm going to read it. It says, "Just do it. You force yourself to get up. You force yourself to put one foot in front of the other. And God damn it, you refuse to let it get to you. You fight, you cry, you curse, then you go about the business of living. And that's how I've done it. There's no other way." And I would never tell someone to hustle or to force or to push to make something happen. But in this case, I would say this is when you do it, when you're fighting for your own life. And that's what I was doing. I was fighting for the light. I was fighting to find my way back to myself. I was fighting to find my own safety within. And I had to do it all by myself. And that's terrible. I can't change that. I can't make that. I couldn't change that, but all I could do, who says it? I think in the book, Leveraging the Universe. Oh, such a great book, by the way. If you have not listened to it, do it on audio. Mike Dooley is just fucking phenomenal. I think I kind of actually want to read it or listen to it again. Anyway, he says, do what you can with where you are, with what you have. And that's it. That's it right there. And this is all I could do, was roll over in the morning, look at that quote, and hope to and pray to God that it gave me the courage to get up. And I still have this piece of paper, by the way. I never got rid of it. It is a symbol of me saving my own life. Ooh, I have chills of me saving my own life. And, I don't want this episode to be too long, and I don't want to go into too much of the story. If you haven't read the book, I highly recommend reading it. It'll give you insight into me for sure. But the main point of the story, right? Holy Grail, the journey through my soul's evolution, was finding the Holy Grail. In 2016 or 2017, I don't know, it's been so long, somewhere in that time frame, I remember waking up in the middle of the night to a spirit, and I literally got up, grabbed a pen, and I had to write what was coming down. And I wrote down 3 phrases, one of which was Holy Grail. And I knew that it was going to be the name of my book. And we all seek the Holy Grail. We all seek to figure out, what is the one key? What is the one thing that's going to change everything? Like, what is the answer? What is the one thing? I want you to know it gets easier. It is worth every single minute of any discomfort you may or may not experience. The Holy Grail is that you are the key that unlocks everything, and nothing outside of you can do this for you. You have the power. You are the creator of your reality. You always were and always will be. You just had to choose to take responsibility, to choose to be responsible for your thoughts, words, and actions, to know that no one can make you feel or do anything. You are and will always be free and sovereign. Woo! It's hard for us. It's hard for us to, we've been conditioned to blame our reality, our circumstances, our parents, our friends, our jobs, our kids, the lack of money, the lack of love, the lack of anything. And I have been victimized in my life so much. And being victimized is 100% a real thing. But here's a quote that I wrote in the book. It says, I am never a victim of what happened to me. I can only ever be a victim of what I choose to believe it means about me. Because we get to choose. We can and have been victimized, but we can't control what happens to us. We can only control what it means about us. And what happened to me means nothing about me. None of that was my fault. I am not unworthy. I am not unloved. I did not deserve it. I was just a victim of someone else's pain. And what I choose to do with that story is where I actually get to gain. It's easy to be a victim. It's easy to play victim. It's easy to play martyr. It's harder to take responsibility and say, yeah, this happened to me and it was shitty. Okay. But what can I do with that? What can I do with that energy? What can I do with that story? In my case, I wrote a whole fucking book. I'm so proud of myself. 2 years. 2 years this has been on the market. I mean, this is 282 pages of my words. It's a lot. Anyway, if you haven't read it, I'll link it in the description if you want to pick it up on Amazon. It is a great book. I am a little biased since I wrote it. But if you're on an awakening journey, this book is going to give you a lot of ahas. And this is what I did with my pain. I gained my power back by sharing my story that I was so ashamed of for so many years. And shame is healed when stories are revealed in safe spaces. And this was my safe space. So thanks for joining me today. I love you guys so much, and I will see you in the next episode. Hey, thanks for listening. This episode was brought to you by JohannaBurkhardt.com, where it's time to defy the limits of your mind and step into your multidimensional mastery. Don't forget to subscribe so that you never miss an episode. See you next time.